I was thinking earlier that I shouldn't just say current head of Visit Britain and former chief of staff to Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab. I should actually do the whole lot and say broadcaster, author, and indeed former MP for Enfield North.
Yeah.
There are other strings to your bow. In fact, there's going to be another one this Sunday because you're actually going to put music presentation into your TV and radio experience.
I'm so looking forward to this. I mean, I don't know how everyone else will feel, but I've got the pleasure of standing in for Rosie while she's away for her Sunday brunch. I'm so looking forward to this.
You and music. Is there any ABBA in there?
Well, you know,
or Eurovision?
Music to me is like is about memories, and they all those great songs remind you of various things.
Well, especially like you're like me because we lived in different places every other 3 years. So
yes,
it's
that's
like
right.
It always reminds you of which posting you were at.
It reminds you of everything. I mean, from girlfriends to places you went to sort of momentous points in your life. So we got a bit of that, and I'm just going to chat. And I promise you, it won't be politics.
No politics at all?
Well, there might be a little bit.
I'm sure. So we're going to talk various things today. UK and EU security to wrap up. We'll look at reform and the impact that Nigel Farage and the party are having on UK politics. But let's start, since this was your starter for 10 anyway, Brexit. Trade deals and talks since Brexit. Let's leave out the EU, USA and India for now. What about the other things that have happened? Australia, New Zealand, Japan, any of those worth anything? There's the one I can never remember, the CPTPP. That's the Pacific Rim one.
But it's basically joining a sort of common market of Asian countries, which actually is quite a good thing. I mean, look, let's start from the beginning. Trade deals are generally good things. They don't immediately affect our lives, but the whole point of trade deals is they're meant to support freer trade, reducing tariffs, making it easier for one country to sell to another.
You mentioned the T word.
I did, and there's a reason that we're all talking about them now, and all these countries are trying to get trade deals is, of course, of Donald Trump's momentous decision to start imposing huge tariffs, or not. So the first thing that happened is when we were in the EU, we never negotiated a single deal. Our last deal we negotiated was under a Secretary of State called Peter Lilly, and that was about 1987. We then went into the single market. And
so everything was done by Europe? Then.
Everything was done by the EU and the EU Commission. So one of the post-Brexit promises was we can go get lots of trade deals. Well, they were absolutely right. They can go and get lots of trade deals. They just haven't got necessarily very good ones or as many as they wanted.
Is that your answer to the ones I said there? Australia, New Zealand, Japan and the Pacific Rim, are they not fantastic ones, really?
No, they're all starter deals and they can only get better.
Right.
But actually, in one sense, getting the deal with Japan was something that the EU hadn't been able to get. I think it was Japan, it might be Australia. So
I think it's Australia. They're still struggling
getting
with.
a deal with America, even under the current government, is something the EU have not been able to get. So there's we shouldn't just poo-poo it.
But Singapore's one of the best economies on the planet. In fact, if not the best. So a deal with them surely's got to be good for us.
The whole point is they're low tax, low regulation, high growth economy, a high value economy. So you want to be doing business with people like those. But the trade deals in themselves, everyone will always tell you, it's going to bring 30 billion in, or it's going to bring
Boris
500
told us
billion.
that we're going to be millionaires next year.
He said, the cake will grow bigger. Well, he was right that the cake is going to grow bigger because it does create opportunities for our people to do business. So let me just take India for a second. So the India trade deal, do you know, things like whiskey, which they love in India, it's the biggest market for whiskey. We had to pay a 90% tariff on every whiskey that is produced in the UK and sold there. That's going to come down within the year to 40% as a result of the trade deal. By the end of a decade, that will be down to 10%. That is the impact of a trade deal. It makes it cheaper for the consumer to buy it and easier for someone to sell it.
Okay. We've also added a number of other countries, Central America, Chile, Southern Africa, South Korea. And again, they all seem pretty, small kind of things. We're not going to make millions from them, are we?
No, but we need to be careful about what we've created. One of the things that the famous Prime Minister Liz Truss claimed when she was business secretary, right? Because she was the business secretary before she got over-elevated. And she was part of her job as a result of Brexit was to create mirror deals with all the countries that we had an agreement with by being a member of the EU.
Right.
So they are literally mirror deals. And what we did,
having that cake and eating it.
Well, they were. And all these countries were kind of quite happy to go to a transition stage. So it's a bit like saying, look, we sell pineapples. No, we don't actually. But lettuces. Very appropriate for Liz Truss. We sell lettuces, right, to you, and you don't charge us any import taxes. And they replicated those deals with something like 49 countries. So within about 3 months, they would say, we've signed 49 trade deals. Well, it's true we had, but they were exact mirror images of what we had. The ones we are talking about now, these are new deals.
All right.
And that is a good thing. But let's not overstate how they're brilliant. They're not brilliant. And in fact, we've conceded quite a lot.
Now, the EU are still our biggest trading partner, are they not, for Britain?
They are not just in that sense. Even though they're a declining market, I think they account for something like 43% of our trade. They are a declining market. It is getting less. The rest of the world is growing more, but they're also our nearest trading partner, and that. It's called gravity. Basically, we used to hear a lot about this.
Well, it's also trying to repair the damage done by Brexit.
Well, some would say that, but let me just.
Well, you did quite a lot of that negotiation, didn't you?
We did. Now, just to deal with the gravity point, because you're your nearest neighbour, you do most trade with them, and it's meant to be easier.
I see.
The thing that was badly explained by Brexiteers and never explained by opponents well enough is that under Brexit, we had this free market where literally we could trade as one country amongst 27. And the minute you impose any barriers to trade, friction, if you like, you are going to do less trade with that country. And friction is often paperwork and bureaucracy and things like that. No one really explained, and few really appreciated. And by the way, I would say even the EU didn't appreciate it, but we certainly didn't in our government, about many of the complications that would arise that could not be smoothed over. So the British response to sorting out paperwork and bureaucracy and delays was say, just send us your stuff as usual, Europe. There's going to be no checks. Everything's going to be great. And the Europeans went, thank you very much. We'll do that. But you Brits, we're going to impose quite a lot of regulations on you because, our borders are sacrosanct.
We did notice here,
Exactly.
Only frozen pork pies these days.
Yes, I hope it's getting better. And there will be things getting better.
No Scotch eggs.
Do you really want Scotch eggs when you've got such a wonderful selection of food here?
Subsequently learn how to make them. But, that's just a few small things. So the EU then, but there were a number of other things that people weren't expecting that went by the wayside along with Brexit and the trade deal with the EU 27.
Well, let's be honest, Cal. You and we spent hours talking about this.
We really did.
Quite a lot of people do. But to most people, there are three things, and I kept saying this in my brief time in office. I said the three things that are going to affect people most are people, passports and pets. And I don't mean the colour of passports. I mean the ability to cross borders. And that is
still going on.
And that is still really very much what people recognise. So things like the claim in this EU deal that is now the reset between Starmer and the EU, that you will actually be able to use e-gates across Europe and travel freely and not have those queues, is absolute spin. Now, as you know, if you come into Alicante, you can use e-gates, right? We all use the e-gates. They're not very good, I have to say. They can be very temperamental. You still have to queue up to get your passport done. And that is not going to change between now and probably October onwards. And when it does change...
Well, even if it does come in October, because there's still doubt.
Yeah, but it's nothing to do with this deal. Because the Europeans, so bear with me here, I'm going to try and do this without being a pain. The EU are bringing in a system called EES. It is a system that any third country, which we are described as, you have to give your biometric details. Once you've done that, you can use an e-gate. So all this talk about the government have negotiated right to use e-gate, well, they haven't. What you will get is that right after the EES system comes in.
As long as you have that right passport, though.
Well,
you've got to have the one with the biometric details on
but
it.
I'd like to think most people have that. But the other thing about this system is it also depends on the countries saying you can use them. It's not an EU Commission thing. So if Spain have a temper tantrum and decide they don't want to let anyone from a third country in through the e-gates or whatever, they can.
So how have they got that as a deal overall across the EU then, if individuals can decide?
Because the EU is able to decide, if you like, on the security of the borders, all right? But the means you enter the border is down to the country.
Right.
So it's Portugal, for example, have the Brits using e-gates and wave everyone through. The Spanish could do that.
Well, they didn't seem to have many TIE problems in Portugal to start with either, did they?
No, they didn't. No, or Malta, places like that. So, it is a choice of the countries. And if they want to say to their customers, which is what I would say the Brits are, given the importance on tourism.
Well, still more Brits coming to Spain to buy property, still more Brits coming to Spain as tourists than any other nationality.
Yeah, absolutely. But if they want to treat their customer like that, it won't be that surprising if the customers decide to up sticks and go somewhere else.
Yeah, okay. All right, what about India before we get to the USA deal? A preferential trade agreement is what it's known. They came to the beginning of this month, wasn't it?
Yes, and I'm actually quite excited about the India deal. And I know it's this rather dodgy Labour government that have brought it in, but it is something the Conservatives were very keen to get, but couldn't get over the line. And
they couldn't get many of these over the line.
No, they didn't. And the difference was they didn't have Donald Trump bringing the rest of the world together to do trade deals, and I think that's driven a sense of urgency. But
lucky old Sakir.
Yeah, lucky. Well, sort of lucky. But the India trade deal is really good for a number of respects. First of all, it's over 10 years. First of all, it will be an evolutionary deal. It's going to change. It's a huge market, and the concessions are quite clear. The Indians want to sell clothes to us, so please, Brits, reduce your taxes, your import taxes on them, which we've done. They weren't very high in the first place. We want to sell everything from professional services through to things like whiskey, as I've mentioned. And we've actually got some really good reduction on import tariffs to one of the world's fastest growing and largest economies. This is actually a good thing. What hits the newspapers? It's all about, hang on, if you're an Indian and you have come from India and you are working in the UK for 3 years, you won't pay national insurance. That's what everyone's talking about, how awful that is. By the way, if you're a Brit and you go over to India, you won't pay national insurance for 3 years as well.
But I think there's a big difference in the amount of people going each way.
Of course there is.
So, yeah, you can see why some of the political persuasion might leap on that.
Well, it's all linked. People are trying to say it's unfair against British workers, which obviously there is an unfairness in there, but that's the price of doing a deal. And, of course, trade deals aren't just about goods and services, they're about people, which is why you have the arguments about youth mobility going on.
Well, of course, which we've been seeing going backwards and forwards between the EU and Britain. All right, the US trade deal then, why is it such a bad deal?
Well, first of all, we've still got tariffs from Donald Trump that we didn't have before the deal. So in a nutshell, he's kind of negotiated to mitigate what were threats of 25% tariffs, in some case higher tariffs, and he's actually got new tariffs, but not so high tariffs. That's not a great place to be with any country. It is obviously, under the circumstances, a very volatile Donald Trump. It's probably slightly better off than having no deal at all.
Well, it's upsetting the European Union apparently as well. Apparently, the UK is undermining World Trade Organization rules through its trade pact with the US. And of course, whilst we're trying to reset the situation with the post-Brexit era, that's an issue.
Well,
isn't it?
Look, Keir Starmer was always in this position. It was always portrayed as he's going to have to choose between sort of sucking up to Donald Trump and getting a really good deal.
They call it most favoured nation principle, don't they?
Yeah, well, that's right, which is actually an important principle. Or sucking up to the EU and going back into closer trade with them. He's trying to have it both ways. And kind of good luck to him.
Well, we were told that's what we would have both ways if we came out of the EU, didn't we? We were told everything would be fine.
But I don't think that's what's troubling Keir Starmer. What's troubling Keir Starmer is can he manage an unpredictable Donald Trump and get closer to the EU. The real politics about this aren't actually the American deal, because it's just not a great deal. There's not a lot in it. And you know, steel people are happy, car people are happier. They're still paying higher tariffs, but they're happier. They were going to pay 25%. So he's mitigated the worst. All right, I'll be gracious and generous there. But actually, none of these trade deals we've talked about, except the EU, are giving up our sovereign right to decide things and going hand in hand with the EU trade deal that will allow basically agriculture, food and all those items that they call them physiosanitary goods and so forth, that are currently sitting in lorries and in some cases not actually getting to their destination. We have basically said we will sign up to your standards, which we happen to have anyway. And that is true. That is common of any trade deal you do. But we will also accept any other changes that you do in the future without question and have no say in it. And it's called dynamic alignment. And by the way, when you have a dispute, which you get with every trade agreement, when they say, you're not being fair to us, and they say, well, we think we are being, it goes to a thing called arbitration. And it's in every agreement. We tried to get it in, arbitration into the EU agreement. Didn't get anywhere because they will not do arbitration. They have said there'll be one group of people who decide.
And that's them.
And it's the European Courts of Justice,
right. Which of course we're not part of.
Well, we have just signed up to accept the rulings of the ECJ on these matters of trade that are included in the agreement. That's a big step for people who feel that's a sellout.
It was a red line all the way through Brexit.
Yeah, but it wasn't Keir Starmer's red line.
No,
even though he told us he wouldn't do it. So that's his political conundrum. But frankly, I don't think that many, apart from, shall we say, the most ardent Brexiteer at the moment is going to be sitting down and chewing on their famous letters and thinking, was this decided to come into this country by the European Courts of Justice or not?
Are there still ardent Brexiteers?
Well, you'll find in the Reform Party, which is the most popular party
elsewhere.
in the UK. That represents about 27-30%
Yeah,
of the
we'll come on to them, we will. So, upcoming deals then, Canada, Mexico, Israel even.
Yes, although I did read that someone was trying to. I did read. Obviously, we know that trade talks have stopped with Israel by David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, which I think is a highly questionable decision to do. And this is over the war in Gaza, of course. But he's basically stopped those trade talks.
Almost not a war anymore, is it? It's just annihilation.
Absolutely. But I think actually this is going to set back relations with Israel, which we have staunchly been a key platform of everything since the war in many of our Middle East foreign policy. It's opened up a huge. Let's not talk about that. We'll go.
We'll get too deep into it. I mean, we're not suggesting anything that Hamas did was right. All we're seeing is that now that perhaps things have gone far too far. But anyway, let's keep on the trade agreements. What about those other two?
So like Canada, for example, there's believe it or not, in Canada there's talk they should join the EU.
That's great. I love that.
Yes, well, you would,
especially under the current circumstances.
So I can see everyone. I mean, the huge dynamic and change of the last.
Hey, come on! If Australia can be in Eurovision, anything's possible.
Well, it is.
Although they didn't get through this time.
I can't believe they'll stay for much longer. Look, the point is, none of this would be happening now. There would be no new trade deals if it wasn't for the huge power and influence of Donald Trump. Canada are scampering around looking for friends, and they will find them in the Commonwealth, and they will find them in London, and they will want to do a trade deal, and it will probably be quite a reasonable trade deal. But remember, for a trade deal to work, both sides need to be a bit unhappy.
And Canada and Mexico actually did have that trade deal with America, which was Trump's last time he was in power,
and he ruled it out. He got rid of it. And so where I think we're going with trade deals now, just take a moment for this. Trump started by saying, I am going to impose huge tariffs. That is, by any other name, protectionist, isn't it? It is closing down and saying, we are not trading with the rest of the world because we're going to make it so expensive for you. The irony is that policy could lead to more free trade because it brings everyone to the table desperate for a deal to do trade. And what does trade do? Reduce tariffs. I have no idea if that's going to happen, but the evidence says he's bringing a lot of people to the table,
right?
Whether it's with him or between themselves, to do trade deals. And that is what's happening.
Let's focus on home then. The state of UK politics. What do you make of it? Is Nigel Farage about to become the next leader of Britain, do you think? I need to say, do you think? Because there's a man in Denny who gets very upset whenever we talk about Nigel Farage, because I think he thinks that just by talking about him means that we're supporting him. We're not supporting anybody here. We're just saying that, he's obviously making the right noises for some people. He's done it again as well. He wants to exploit Labour's winter fuel payment climb down by talking about the two-child benefit cap to be scrapped as well, which is just going to mire the UK politics situation even more, which is, of course, what he's all about. He wants to take voters from anybody.
Well, if politics was normal, I would have said Nigel Farage has just made a big mistake, because what he's doing now is he thinks he's got any defecting Tories sewn up because he knows they're fed up. And he's got them in reform already, and we saw that in the local elections. He kind of just finished off a lot of them. I mean, he did most of the damage in the general election.
That wasn't just a bloody nose for the government, though? That wasn't the voters saying...
This was about Conservative voters having moved to reform. Many of them did it in the general election, and a lot more were doing it in the local elections. And he kind of thinks he's got that sewn up, and that's his strategy. Which is why you see Kemi Badenoch and the Conservatives trying to out-reform reform, which has to be one of the most stupid things they've done in quite a few years. But let's park that, because your question is about Nigel Farage now going, let's say, for simplicity's sake, going left. Mm-hmm. And he's talking about the two-child benefit cap. Yeah. What that is, not to be confused with what we talk about as child benefit, that is actually saying... because you have 3 children or 4 children, you don't get more benefits, okay? And we're saying there's effectively any benefits that are influenced by children, it's two-child cap benefit, right? And that is hated by Labour MPs. And they've been rebelling privately and demanding that this is reintroduced, okay? So part that to one side. There is a suspicion Keir Starmer will again give in to his MPs on that. Nigel Farage looked at the election results in the general election and in the local elections and saw his party was coming second to Labour in a lot of their heartland seats. And he's decided now he can swing left and win their votes and form a government. And he's encouraged by the polls that kind of say that's what it's going to be like, Nigel. I think he's made a mistake, because I know some will find this hard to believe, but generally Conservative voters are not minded to actually dish out huge chunks of benefits, okay? They would talk about compassionate conservatism. Mm-hmm. They will say, give it to those that are in need. But the idea that their new leader in reform is going left to support more benefit spending when we have one of the biggest deficits we've ever had, in great financial trouble, to appease the Labour Party is going to say, hang on, Nigel, what do you stand for? And if politics was normal, I'd say he's going to lose Conservatives over that, and it's going to cause problems. The difficulty is politics is not normal. People loathe the Conservatives still, and they also have managed to loathe Labour in only 1 year of office, which you talk about 12 years of the Tories.
We hear about this a lot. We do hear about this a lot.
And they really are in trouble, Labour. They've lost the support. It's in so much of the polling. And therefore, whether it was Nigel Farage or someone else, people are turning to anyone but the Conservatives and anyone but Labour.
Right. No, this isn't just a British thing, because we've seen this in different parts of the world, haven't we, where it's anybody else other than the people that have traditionally been in power, backwards and forwards. So, it was probably coming anyway. Post-pandemic, both parties have both struggled. So, yes, it's probably a shame that it's Labour this way round. Had it been the other way round, it might have still been the same situation. But surely Nigel can do what he wants in this sort of situation, just like Donald Trump. Follow what the people want.
Well, he's going to do that. And the question is, does it matter what he says, or does it just matter he's there?
I wonder whether in Britain people will see through that, where perhaps they might not have done in the USA.
Well, it's quite interesting, because my guess is that they won't now, and he'll carry on riding high in the polls. When it actually comes to voting to form a government, they will take a second look and look harder. Does that mean he won't win? No. What does seem likely, I'm not ready to take a bet with you yet, Cal. Mm-hmm. What does seem likely, though, is he could be the largest party and will rely on another party to put him into government. That is huge. He's got 5 MPs now. I'm basically saying he'll win another 280.
That's a huge change. Do you? Yes, I'm not sure if that could happen. I don't know. Like I said, that's why you're not willing to bet yet.
If you look at the mainly because they'll probably cock it up, to be honest.
I was going to say, they're not actually completely together, Reform, are they? And they need to get to the point where they're deciding who's pulling which way and what, and who's going to stay and who's going to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they're not that complete package.
It's absolutely true. You can fit his whole party into a taxi if it's the parliamentary party at the moment. And that's because they lost one and then they gained one back with their by-election win. But, Cal, the reason... if you support them, to be happy. If you don't support them, to be concerned, is that Labour's ownership of seats is so thin. It makes my narrow majority back in 2015 look pretty good. They are so slim, the majorities. And what we do know is there is huge disillusionment with Labour.
I know you said that again, but I think, people will also give them a little bit more time. I'm
not sure they will. And the reason, I don't say this
I say that because we do talk to a couple of people who are very behind the Labour idea.
Yeah.
Perhaps not the current leader, but anyway, generally are. And, we have big, long discussions about that, and they're both adamant that
and I
Labour deserve their chance.
If politics was normal,
right, I'm with you.
That would be right. Now, David Cameron was deeply just remember this, in 2011-12, when his policies were kicking in, where we basically controlled spending, I think we were the last government to do it, we controlled spending. He was deeply unpopular. We were trailing in the polls, and it was like, I better start looking for another job. Okay, but in normal times like those, as we got close to the election, the opposition came under scrutiny, and that was Ed Miliband at the time. They were found wanting, and Cameron's message of financial stability kind of won the day.
I wonder whether the electorate believe anybody anymore, especially the Conservatives.
They won't. They certainly won't.
So even if you get,
we
were talking about this on Friday, somebody to come and lead the party other than Kemi Badenoch, who we both agree is probably not going to be there come an election. But even if who is it they've got, and where will they come from?
But my point is, it's not the Conservatives who will be going into power. I was using that as an example of how David Cameron, in normal political times, deeply unpopular, just like the Labour government, was able to win it. We're not in those times. First of all, the Conservative Party, no one's going to trust them for 10 years. And even if they put up another leader, if they've served in the previous cabinet under, I can't remember, Rishi Sunak now, right, and anyone else you like to throw in, they will not lead the party anywhere, all right? And they're not the opposition for Labour to beat, if you like. Trusting Labour now is an all-time low. They're about to breach their biggest promise, which was the idea of following their own fiscal rules. The most sensible economists are saying already, because of U-turns, because of the state of the economy, Rachel Reeves is going to have a black hole of 60 billion by the autumn fiscal statement. That means tax rises again. We had 40 billion of tax rises in October, and she said these are once-in-a-lifetime tax rises. They're coming back for more, okay? I cannot see how they can avoid it. Hardly anyone does. That is all breaking down the trust. People are just going, you're not telling the truth. You just conned us. You're all as bad as each other.
And of course,
go to reform.
Nobody's going to believe the Conservatives, like you said, for another 10 years.
And they'll go to reform.
They'll believe Nigel Farage.
When you get fed up with the system, you go to whatever the best alternative is, and they see him as the best alternative.
That's if we're all still here. We were just checking because we always used to hear about the doomsday clock, and it said it wavered between 10 and 2 minutes to midnight. Do you know where we are now? 89 seconds to midnight on the doomsday clock. We didn't achieve anything.
No, we don't talk about that either, do we?
Not as much. We used to,
Probably,
obviously, a lot before.
We're all pretty fed up as it is now, Cal, so thanks for that.
Yeah, OK. Politico had a big statement in the last couple of days. Europe needs to learn the art of unpowering Russia. We're getting new words here as well. Far from powerless, it's just under-leveraged. But we need to do things without the help of the United States, it seems, these days. And what is NATO if it's not with the United States? It's what they're looking at. European forces or a European army.
We kind of know Russia responds to
strength,
doesn't it? And at the moment, the talk is Trump is going to walk away from trying to bring Putin and Zelensky together to do a deal, right? And the reason he's going to walk away is because, frankly, he's made a bit of a wally of himself by saying he could end the war in 24 hours, and he's getting nowhere.
Well, there seems to have been some rather large dollops of appeasement going on whilst he thought he could get on top of the situation, but he finally flipped yesterday and said Putin was crazy. He had a pop at Zelensky as well for everything that comes out of his mouth, but I think that probably upsets Trump because a lot of the time Zelensky says it how it is.
Yeah, and I also think equating with the fact that Putin launched these massive attacks over the weekend and saying, that's out of order, well, good for Trump, but then to put it on exactly the same level as Zelensky speaking truth to power, it's just ludicrous.
Does it regularly.
Okay, but what does it mean? If Putin responds to strength and Trump walks away, does he walk away and do what would be the worst thing, is withdraw American military support and hardware? Because that is like open door to Putin, because it leaves us...
It's not massive, though, across Europe these days.
Well, what he's providing...
It's what's backed.
And the intelligence he's imparting. Remember, that caused havoc when he took it away for about 2 days. That would be huge, and it would have a material effect on the chances of Ukraine, frankly, surviving this. And what's the answer is you've got Germany, France and Britain saying actually a coordinated EU army or EU response.
Let's not forget the Baltic states are quite vociferous in their criticism, and they are the ones that are spending most of GDP as well.
But there's such a huge problem here is that just think about this. In America, one chain of command, one type of tank, it's all pretty clear what's going on. What do we have here? We have in Europe, amongst all the forces, which spend a lot of money, by the way, almost the same as America, if you add them together.
Collectively.
21 tanks, 17 different types of aircraft, 27 different chains of command. The interoperability of it, you'll know this with your military background, is utter chaos.
However, they do actually operate on a regular basis. They are right down the eastern flank on a regular basis with multi-forces. They're out on exercise at the moment at sea, and there are regular exercises. So there are ways that they can and do work together, and it has happened in the past. Also, we did have a situation where nobody's radios could talk to anybody as well, but we don't talk about that anymore.
Yeah, no, and I think one time when in actual action in 2011, a lot of that interoperability failed, which is why they've tried to improve it. But it's not there, and it's not actually looking that great.
Nobody's saying it's fantastic,
but would it deter Putin? That's the crunch. Or would he feel emboldened if Trump went off somewhere else and focused on, say, India, Pakistan, for example, where he can, or Gaza even, where he can then hopefully for him, as he sees it, earn a Nobel Peace Prize and just lose interest in Ukraine? Its strategic and foreign policy implications are so huge, but I wouldn't put it past him. If he just walked away from the table and says, I give up on you two, but you can carry on and have the hardware, well, then I think Europe could step up and perhaps lead the possible solution, if you like, what you've been talking about, deleveraging the situation. But this is a chronic situation where we are in the hands of the most unpredictable Western leader ever. That I feel we're at a pivot point. It could go one way or the other.
But hence the fact that the doomsday clock has now changed and we are 89 seconds to midnight. What is the answer? We need a strong world leader. You mentioned while we were in the break about, how would Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan have dealt with the current situation? Well, pretty differently, I would have thought.
Yeah, and I think they would have built the coalition. I mean, do you remember one of the strengths, for example, in the first Iraq war, not the second Iraq war, was how George Bush Sr. built an international coalition. And actually, that's how you try and face down the beast. Look, I'm
after 9/11 is the only time that Article 5 has been invoked, and that was by the United States, and the support came from the rest of us.
And you're talking about Article 5, which binds every member of NATO to support
an attack on one means an attack on all.
And of course, the irony here is that the person who's probably not going to honour that will be the president of the United States. So we find ourselves with weakened NATO. So will we need a new command structure? Will we need one that's European defence?
It's not going to happen quickly enough. I don't think.
And actually, we'll be trying to sort out this crisis with Ukraine, but we need to have a view with what's the next crisis coming as well. Let's be honest, if you sort out Putin now, he's going to retreat and come back in another way. Whether it's another neighbouring state, it could be activity in the Arctic, which is one of the long-term strategic threats.
It could be American activity in the Arctic, the way things have been going.
Or Chinese. But the reality is, do we have the capability and response to do it? The answer is we do not, because we literally sat back and let America look after us. And in some senses, it's our own damned fault that we were expecting them to lead the world and pick up the check. And Trump's come along and said, I'm not doing that anymore. He's wrong to do it in the face of the conflict with Ukraine. But, he has a point.
All right, Nick. We do think that we're going to be up to 5% at some point, with 3.5%, I think, of GDP, 3.5% of GDP for most European countries, and I'm including Britain in that, not EU countries, in a short period of time. But yeah, there's a lot of catching up to do, and it's kind of scary. Thanks, Nick. Good to speak to you. Good to have the time as well.